Welcome back to Raising Questions. The studio audience is ready, and we have a lot of questions that have been submitted from around the world, which is why we have a picture of almost the entire world ready for us in order to help us out today. First of all, what is the question that we had to ask first of all? Well, it is, what's happening to our relationship with the rest of the world? What's happening between the United States of America and the rest of the world? As you can see on the map, we have North Korea and South Korea to worry about, and we have Iran, and we know that a new man has been appointed or will be taking over soon as one of the closest advisors to the president, and his name is John Bolton, or Bomber Bolton, as he ought to be called. He has favored bombing Iran, they say, and has also favored swift military action against North Korea. Now, that justifies some worry. That justifies a lot of worry, especially among certain quarters, certain observers who say, boy, oh boy, this is really a departure in American politics. A president who talks tough to North Korea and talks maybe about tough action against Iran. But what is the truth? There's a question right there. Ever since we had nuclear weapons, America has acted tough and talked tough. The current occupant of the White House, Mr. Trump, is not the first person in the world to upset people abroad by talking about nuclear weapons and the use of nuclear weapons. Even JFK did it. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK said that if a rocket landed on America from Cuba, the Soviet Union would face the full retaliatory force, that's almost a quote, full retaliatory forces of the United States. In other words, he was saying, clown around with this anymore, and you will disappear. Now that's tough talk. And the current occupant of the White House, again, has talked, well, in his own style, in pretty much the same way. A lot of people abroad are getting very upset about that kind of tough talk, but that's the style that we elected. And the man whom we elected has said over and over again he wants to make America great again. I think he's succeeding. In other words, his slogan ought to be something that people almost agree that he has made into the truth. Almost. America will great again. He is going to make America great again. He's already doing it. America is grating on everybody's nerves. But the question is, once again, is that really so bad and so awful? As I said, way back to Eisenhower, Kennedy, and so forth. A lot of people abroad have been upset by tough talk by the Americans. Now, in the Cold War, we had a lot of tough talk, and we had troops everywhere. We had almost 500,000 troops, for instance, in Europe. Currently, we have far fewer than that in Europe. We only have 60,000 in Europe at the moment. And this raises the question, is that enough? What we have is a changing situation in the United States. And with regard to our diplomatic, economic, and military policies towards the rest of the world. And it's not all tough talk. This is all very, very confusing. I hope I've confused you. This is very, very confusing. On the one hand, we have a president talking very tough, even about nuclear weapons and the military. And on the other hand, America has drawn down troops in one of the most important theaters of possible war in the world, namely in Europe. That raises the question, what do the Russians think? The Soviet Union used to think, boy, America's got at least 400,000 troops in Europe. If we try too hard, diplomatically, economically, and militarily, to oppress or at least press against them, things are going to go badly. Now, they look at our forces in Europe, which are down to 60,000 and only 35,000 in Germany. I wonder what Mr. Putin thinks. Is America actually softening up? And what does Europe think as far as that's concerned? Pretty soon, is it possible, this is another big question, is it possible that the Europeans themselves are going to be pleading with the United States for more troops. And what will be the effect of that? Well, let's take a look at the rest of the world. And the rest of the world includes a bunch of questions that have very little to do with international policies, but they're still very important. What's going to happen, for instance, in the Mueller probe? The bold prediction of this program is the Mueller probe will have virtually no effect whatsoever on presidential politics. At least it will not indict or end up in anything like an indictment against the current president. I predict that the jurisdiction of the Mueller probe is so wide that he's going to issue a report that makes a lot of trouble for a lot of other people, and I actually doubt that he's going to be able to find any collusion of fraudulent nature by the president and his campaign with the Russians. That's a bold prediction, but we'll see what happens. What about the other changes that are occurring on the planet Earth, and especially in the United States? One of the biggest changes, and therefore one of the biggest questions, is what about social media? This is going to become a more and more popular topic of discussion as time goes on, and it won't take very much time. We've already seen that Silicon Valley is now under very, very intense pressure to change its ways, finally. Because the question is, are social media actually unsocial media? That's the real question. You see lots and lots of people going into cafes, for instance, sitting around the same table. And what are they doing? They're looking at their phones and they're working on their computers. They're not talking to each other very much. And what is the effect of that on people's ability to actually meet personally and talk to each other eye to eye, face to face? And what is the effect of all that on family relations? The generations that were not born holding electronic devices, for instance, might have a tough time interpreting the actual behavior and the thoughts of their children because the children have been overly influenced by electronic media. Now that happened in the age even of just plain old television, but now it's possibly getting even worse. The electronic media are burrowing themselves farther and farther into our minds. What will be the changes that take place neurologically in the human brain? Some people are actually suggesting that that is going on. It could even change the relationship between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. There are people who are saying it might lead to more schizophrenia. What is schizophrenia? Schizophrenia is the inability to have a coherent viewpoint on the real world, more or less. That's a loose definition. But as we have more and more influence exercised by Silicon Valley through the devices that they produce, we tend to go for snippets of information here and there. What's new? What's new? What's new? And it's not tied together as well as it used to be, even a couple of decades ago. And is this going to make people less focused? My answer is yes, but that is a really, really big question. And actually, despite what I said a couple minutes ago, there is an interplay between the unsocial media, between the electronic phones and so forth and so on, and the United States and its policies toward the rest of the world, especially if it's true that the current occupant of the White House, if the current president is himself overly influenced by these electronic media. So the point is really, this is a really big question. Is it true that it used to be that the most important thing to change in our country in order to improve it, is it true that the most important thing to change was in the realm of politics? We need a new president, we need a new Congress, that kind of thing. Or is it actually more true, and I suspect that it is, that Washington and state capitals and other aspects of politics and the economy are very, very much under the influence of what I'm calling unsocial media, under the influence of Silicon Valley? And is it more important to change their leaders than it is to change our political leaders? It's also going to be an important question, how are we going to change Silicon Valley and improve it and make it more human without a change in politics? Well, we'll answer those questions, or at least make an attempt, later on another episode of Raising Questions.